Hi, everyone. It's Radley Griffin from Tampa, Florida, and Mihaela Telecan from Melbourne, Florida. Two Floridians here with our weekly low carb chats. Thanks for tuning in. And Mihaela, thanks for being here again.
Thank you for having me. It's a pleasure, as always.
As always. And yes. This is, I believe, our fifth chat. And we're kind of, is it six?
But let's not try to keep track of how many and what we talked about, because it's gonna be
absolutely. It has a nice evolution to it. So I think one of the things we really wanted to, you and I have been sort of incorporating into our advice and counseling and coaching we're giving our patients and clients, and it comes up virtually multiple times a day. And today we're going to talk about fasting. And in full disclosure, in the spirit of today's chat, I am fasting. So
was it fasting?
No, and we'll talk about that. I'm coffee fasting. So I'm doing coffee.
Fat coffee fasting, or just coffee fasting?
A very little amount, minuscule amount of heavy cream, a teaspoon in my coffee for just a little bit. So not a true water fast, but we're going to clarify this and the different types of fasting. And I want to talk about how I really got into fasting. And Mihaela, maybe you could share your experience too. My patients are so great in the sense that it's such a collaborative environment in our practice, and there's a lot of sharing that happens. And one of my patients exposed me to dietdoctor.com, which I think has been a wonderful resource for physicians and people alike. And I came across Dr. Jason Fung on that website. And Dr. Fung is a nephrologist in Toronto. And he is just dynamite. I love his lectures, and he's a low carb physician, but he really got me passionate about fasting, because he was noticing in his patients, he would have his diabetic patients and his renal failure patients, kidney failure patients, and he would put them on low carb, and then they would come back and show them their food diary, and they were eating noodles and rice noodles, and he thought, this isn't working. So he needed something to really offset that carb feasting or meal feasting, and he started incorporating fasting into his world. And I thought, yes, this is really terrific. So he is a big proponent of fasting. He has a nice book here that we both have, The Complete Guide to Fasting, which is a really wonderfully it's just really for the layperson. It's a wonderful book. But let's talk about, and so since then, I've been really incorporating fasting into my regimen for patients. And we'll talk about when do we do it, when do we not do it, when is it a bad idea, good idea, the different types. There's just a lot of exciting information regarding fasting, really a lot of the benefits. And Mihaela, what's your experience with fasting? When did you stumble across this?
Oh, for me, it was quite early in my low carb venture. It was the winter of 2012. It was a gluten summit put together by Dr. Is it Bob? He's a functional medicine practitioner, and he did one of the first gluten summits. And Dave Asprey was one of the speakers that was interviewed.
Okay.
And he talked about the bulletproof coffee and saying how it's easier to do the fast. And at the time, actually, I was doing the intermittent. First, I heard about intermittent fasting through Dr. Mercola. I don't know if you follow him. Yeah. Mm-hmm. He always interviews the cutting edge, the more on the edge information.
Yeah, he pushes the envelope for sure.
I know. And I like that because it opens, people to different perspectives, right? So that's when I first heard about intermittent fasting, and I was doing it with water. And mind you, I was nursing, and the recommendation is not to fast if you're nursing or pregnant. But my son was already a year and a half. We were nursing only for the bonding, not because he was getting nutrients from it. But nevertheless, I was nursing and doing intermittent fasting with water. And I have to say, I was looking for 12 o'clock. to eat. So when I learned about the fat fasting, I was excited to try it, and that brought the fasting to a whole other dimension. Right. But that's how I found out about intermittent fasting, basically back in 2012. And I can say that since then, since December of 2012, I've been doing intermittent fasting.
So let's talk to our people about what is fasting, and really why do we feel like this is an important component to the low carb, high fat diet for a lot of people, if not every person. Let's talk a little bit about the science behind fasting and how that really fits into what we've already been discussing here on our chat. So can you talk a little bit about that?
The simplest way I can say it 10x's the results, and that's exactly how I have it in my book. I'm working on publishing a book soon, and I have a section about fasting, and I say if you want to 10x your results that you're getting by adopting this way of eating, incorporate fasting. And then there are many types of fasting. So basically, everything we achieve with a low carb diet, where the body is forced to burn a different fuel, which is fatty acids and ketones for energy, it just gets so much faster, accomplishes so much faster when you abstain from food altogether. Right. It's like pushing the body to get results in a much faster and more effective way.
Right. And it comes back down to insulin, correct? So when we're fasting, our insulin levels are hopefully close to zero or at zero, and we can really access our stores, our fat stores for those ketone bodies, as we've discussed, to basically fuel ourselves, correct?
So it boils down like this. Our body requires energy.
Yes.
We can get energy from external source by eating, or we can get energy from what we already stored when we were eating. So fasting is just another way of getting energy from this time, not from exogenous source, but from endogenous source, what we've stored. And because we learned last week that the glycogen store is kind of small and the fat store is really big, after an overnight fast, most of the glycogen is low. And now if we wake up and we don't right away jump into having breakfast, we prolong this overnight fast, and the body has to get energy from somewhere, and it will do it more effectively by mobilizing this fat and using it as source of energy.
Oh, good. And so that's a nice segue. So we think there's benefits to doing this. We were discussing that the recent Nobel winner is discussing or won with his study on autophagy, or where the body is sort of eating itself and replenishing itself. So let's talk a little bit about the benefits of fasting and what are we seeing, and then we'll talk about some of the questions we get. Is fasting dangerous? Won't we burn muscle instead of fat? Won't our body, we hear this all the time, go into shutdown mode or starvation mode? And we'll touch on that a little bit. But what are some of the benefits you're seeing with fasting? So we see that the weight loss is accelerated. What are some of the other benefits you're seeing?
So, of course, aside from the weight loss, which we all want, I have to say that the first weight loss, like in a shorter fast, is mostly water if you're not carb adapted already. So maybe we should say that it's easier to do the fasting after you already for at least a month, maybe even 2, 3, 4 are following the low carb diet. It's kind of a natural progression.
I agree.
It's almost like, I like to say, when you find, you like this particular artist, and you find the radio station that plays this artist, and you're so excited. So the artist is like eating whole foods, then the radio station, you go low carb, and then you go to see him live in concert. It's like that. So it's like a progression of things. Sure. Slowly you get there, but your body takes you there, so it's not a struggle.
Yeah. So you're not going to go to a concert of someone you just got introduced to. You're not going to really enjoy the show very much.
Yeah, because you don't know the songs, you can sing, you can get into it. So that's the best way I can explain this progression of things. So if you just eat the regular standard American diet and you fast even for 48 hours, 72 hours, most likely all you use is mostly water.
Okay.
So you go back and you eat and will come back. But it's a whole other story when your body is already used to having less carbs. So it starts to burn more fat for fuel. It has that metabolic flexibility. And now when you fast, you just accelerate that. So more fat gets burned, and eventually you consolidate weight loss. It's not just water weight loss.
Right.
So that's to be said about the weight loss. But then we see, of course, major significant improvement in biomarkers like glucose and insulin, inflammatory markers. Overall, when we eat, anything we eat, we produce free radicals.
Sure.
That's normal. If we exercise, we produce free radicals. When we breathe, when we eat. And of course, we eat more than we exercise, so we produce more oxidative damage with foods. And especially when we burn carbohydrates as fuel, we produce more oxidative damage. So we see a reduction actually in inflammation and inflammatory markers in people that engage in fasting. So they have less aches and pains, they are less stiff, they feel better. Clearer thinking, the brain starts to function better. For whatever reason, our brain actually functions better. It's almost like you upgrade the way you think and the way the neuronal connections are formed when your brain runs on ketones versus glucose.
I agree, yes.
And is that sustained energy? It's like you just have energy and you don't have to stop to eat, and you don't think about it. It's so much energy gets wasted thinking from meal to meal. I think I said this before. People eat breakfast and they're already preoccupied to what would they eat for lunch, and will they find the right one? How about the snack? Is this anxiety, food-related induced anxiety that takes a lot of brain space? So when you don't eat, you don't have to think about cooking, shopping, prepping, cleaning afterwards, any of that. So much space, all of us, like time, physical time and mental space. So that's a benefit that I find it very important in the high-paced lives we are living today.
Not to mention the savings, if you're...
Right, with less, you save money. And going to more like the health benefits, because of this autophagia that you mentioned, which is like a self-cleaning, it's the body, our cells have like a predetermined lifespan. Like the enterocyte turns over every 3 days. The cells in the eye every 2 days. So they're very active. The red blood cells in 3 months, right? So each cell by itself has a determined lifespan. And when it dies, it's called apoptosis, right?
Yep.
But then throughout their lifespan, they accumulate cellular junk and damage. And for the cell to reach that lifespan that's given genetically, it has to do periodic cleansing. And that's called autophagia. That's kind of how I see it and I explain. So it's a difference. So this autophagia is actually suppressed when we eat, especially if we eat foods that stimulate or trigger insulin and amino acids that come from excess protein consumption. And this is due to a pathway called mTOR, which was discovered, I think, in the 90s in relationship with a drug, the rapamycin, that was used for cancer treatments. And it has to do with caloric restriction. So they realized, is this the effect that we get on the body is because of the drug, or is because we reduce calories. So basically you eat less or less frequent and less of those foods that stimulate insulin and come with amino acids. And you have this result, which is cancer suppression, cancer growth suppression. So it's nice that the science comes and proves to or shows us how fasting, which has been done for as long as humans existed, it's so therapeutic. But in the last 50 years, it's lost its popularity because we tell people eat 3 meals a day and 3 snacks on top of it. So what does that mean to our body? Our body never gets enough rest from food for this cleansing, self-cleaning mechanism, this autophagia to take place, right? So the cells can work properly for 3 months or 3 days or whatever length of time. So that's how we age prematurely and we develop diseases. That's one theory, because the body doesn't get to maintain. Right. And in my book, I use the analogy with the blender. Like if you have a blender, you've got to replace parts so the blender can work for the 20 years that the manufacturer tells you. To replace parts, you can't use the blender to change the engine or to allow our body to clean, to self-maintain itself, we've got to give it a rest from so much food. Fasting does it the best, because when we fast, there's no amino acids coming in, insulin is not stimulated, hence this pathway that supports growth is suppressed, and the body gets to do its own maintenance. Each cell gets to get rid of cellular junk, the damaged DNA or proteins or fibrinogen or whatever it is, amyloid plaque. I mean, if we go to all the benefits that fasting is, research is going on. We know that it helps with neurological problems like Alzheimer's and all neurological, ALS and MS and so on. Cancer has great body of research showing improvements, as well as inflammation in general and reversal of metabolic disorders just by not eating, basically.
Yeah. So let's talk about the different types of fasting that are out there. So you talked about a fat fast, a water fast. We heard about the green smoothie fast, that people are juice fasting, if you will. I think we want to let our listeners, give them a little bit of guidance here as far as the types of fasting we're talking about. So generally when I'm recommending fasting for my patients, I'm including 4 products typically. And I'm usually using fasting not so much in the expert phase, maybe that you or some of the expert fasters out there are using, but more so as a adjunct or as I think a companion to the low carb diet, especially if they're seeking weight loss and other health benefits. So I'm typically recommending water, bone broth, coffee, or tea. And in the coffee, we say just a little bit of fat in there, just to maybe for some flavor, or even coconut oil or MCT oil for a little bit of energy. That's generally what I'm recommending for my patients. And then from a length of time perspective, that really varies. I think we start low and go slow. So does that line up with how you're counseling your clients?
Absolutely. I have few, depending on the goal, like if it's a short-term fast, water. Let's say the person just gets into this intermittent fasting, right? Maybe we should say that fasting, it's abstinence from food. So true fast is only water, not even coffee or tea or fat or anything. Then we should say that fat, because it's metabolically neutral, because it doesn't trigger an insulin response from the body, it mimics fast. It's not calorically neutral, but metabolically neutral. So that's why a fat fast, it's easier done because the person gets some like energy, plus it gets the fat that's easier converted to ketones, right? Now, if the person just wants to, let's say, push their breakfast from 8 to 10, water.
Yeah. Okay.
Tea, coffee. If the person wants to push it all the way to lunch, a fat coffee would help. Yeah. For the reasons I just explained. And I'm pretty liberal with regards to fat, especially for women. I think women need more fat than men because of all the sex hormones.
Okay.
And it's cholesterol including. So I'm okay with a tablespoon of butter and a tablespoon of coconut oil or MCT oil and blend it in the coffee or tea. And if they want to add some spices like allspice or cinnamon or something like that to flavor their coffee, that's also okay. So that's like shorter fasts. If someone wants to go a dinner to dinner fast, for example, which is a 24-hour fast, then I say, okay, so salt and water, or water and salt in your. It's important to add salt. I have to say this. Meat and bone stock, whether it's chicken, beef, pork, whatever you like, preferably homemade. If we go 3 days, like 72 hours or maybe even longer, then I like to add fermented beverages too, like the sauerkraut juice or beetroot kvass, or sometimes even kombucha, although that has some residual sugar. But mostly we stay away from the sweet ones. We stay, because I want to make sure I add the ferment, the beneficial bacteria to the gut, because we don't eat anything. So I try to make it as therapeutic and gut healing as possible. So when we do the meat and bone stock, although it has some amino acids, if we don't drink like a whole gallon in a day, we stay with 2 or 3 cups. It's good for the gut lining. And if we add another cup of some fermented beverage, I think it makes it easier. In some cases, if the person doesn't need to worry about glycemic control or weight loss, green juices, like celery and cucumbers and cabbage and parsley and cilantro and ginger and turmeric, all juiced, and some lemon juice in there. Because when we remove the fiber from green vegetables, we're left with net carbs, so it can still impact blood glucose. So depending on the goal, but that can be an option.
Okay.
And then depends how long we go with the fast.
Yeah, I think that's great. I think, to clarify for our viewers, most Americans, our Western diet is typically a 12-hour fast, and so we typically eat at, say, 7 a.m. and our last meal is at 7 p.m. and then we fast for 12 hours while we're sleeping. That's considered typical.
I think it's even shorter. People have snacks like 9, 10 o'clock, so I think it's shorter.
You're absolutely right there. And then, at ice cream at bedtime, so on and so forth.
10 hours probably.
Right. And so I think, one way for people to sort of get into this very gradually is just to extend that to a 16-hour fast where we're just skipping breakfast and having a coffee for breakfast. And then from there, really what we're trying to do is tell people, let's consolidate that eating in the afternoon or evening, and let that be our insulin release time. And we wrap it up in the evening, and then we can get right back into our fat burning mode shortly after depends on what we eat, of course. After we eat, our insulin will fall again, and we can continue the fat burning process. So I think a lot of people have questions. When should I not fast? When is it not a good idea to fast? And I know we don't want people to fast if they're malnourished. We have to be very concerned about, things like eating disorders, in a stress state. I think, cancer is an interesting thing. Fasting may benefit cancer, but in the middle of treatment, is that the best thing to do? When are some real hallmark, do not fast during these periods of time? What would you tell your clients?
So first of all, just like you said, somebody that has disordered eating or eating disorders, whether it's bulimia or anorexia, I don't think I would recommend fasting until they would get to a place where they're in peace with food.
Right.
Any underweight person, I don't think long fast is necessary at all. children.
Right, absolutely not.
Grow. And maybe I should have explained that this mTOR pathway that when it's suppressed, it's good for self-cleaning. It's actually a very important pathway to be activated by food and protein and even carbohydrates in young growing children. Mm-hmm. They need to grow. We want that pathway to work. And in an athlete that's in full performance, they need the stimulation for the muscle growth and performance. So children, pregnant, and nursing women. Right. Those would be one. With regards to cancer, I'm not specializing in cancer. So if I ever get cancer patients, I usually refer them out. But I would say if the person is emaciated, maybe that has to be taken carefully. If the person is not, like if it's a beginning stage where they still have, considerable amount of fat on their body and muscle mass, I think it's actually okay to fast. Yeah. Now I don't know in conjunction with chemotherapy, how would that be in terms of processing the toxins? Because when we fast, we detoxify nevertheless. So liver, where the toxins get filtered and converted or biotransformed, so they can be safely eliminated from body. So if we don't have the nutrients that the liver requires, especially in the phase 2 of detox, it can be questionable. So the chemo toxic effect may be stronger. Right. This is just an educated guess. Ooh, because we need those amino acids for conjugations of the phase 2 of liver detox. So maybe that's not a good idea. Maybe during a chemo or radiation, it's better to just do the low carb. That creates an unfriendly environment for the cancer, and just do it before in the preparation or after in the post phase. But that's kind of, do you know of any other?
Yeah, I would say also in with diabetic patients, really under, especially if they're taking a drug like insulin, which ultimately we're trying to get our patients off of insulin. And there's other diabetic medications that will oral medications that will stimulate insulin release. And although these are becoming more archaic as we go along, but there are still some patients who are on the drugs that will stimulate insulin release, whether they're eating or not. The newer generations will only stimulate insulin release in response to a meal. But for the most part, I would really want to follow them closely. I like fasting for them in a way to gain control over their blood sugar, but we do that in a very monitored fashion, close communication. We're significantly reducing insulin, and it's really with my patients and patients in our practice, it's a pretty fluid conversation as we're trying to get our patients' diabetes cured, if I may be so bold, and then eliminate their medications from their life. And then also people who are taking a lot of morning medications too. You're taking a big load of medications, and gosh, that's really upsetting to the gut if you're not having anything to eat. So we strategize with that as well. Yeah. As far as maybe timing the medications differently, but these are the techniques we're using. Talking about this with our patients, and those that don't have a physician that's guiding them. We encourage people to find a physician, find a practitioner who is speaking this language, and to work with them. As opposed to trying to really navigate this on your own, especially if you're taking a lot of medications, that can be dangerous. So we don't want to advise. We want to advise a nice collaborative environment for people trying to do this.
Yes, thank you for clarifying that, because I forgot. Yes, I definitely say that, especially if they're on insulin. If it's just drugs, they just don't take the drugs. Like a type 2 diabetic that's just taking oral hypoglycemic agents. They just refrain from taking and close monitoring and reporting. That, in fact, that's One of my clients, I know we did like a 90 something hours, and oh boy, what great results. It had like a few months reset on her pancreas, because she was already prescribed. It's like an advanced type 2 where they prescribe insulin.
Yes.
And it was amazing to see the long-term effect of reset, giving that rest to the pancreas, so it started to again produce insulin and to respond appropriately to the low carb, because we were doing low carb for quite a while. And then she said, you know what, I'm going for it. Well,
good for her. That's great. Do we have time for one question that we have from our audience, a pre-question? Do we?
Yes.
I know we try not to go too long. You and I get so passionate about what we're talking about that time flies. So we did have one question here from one of our viewers. Can I fast with adrenal fatigue? This is a tough question. And it's, we start that with, well, what actually is adrenal fatigue, and how are we diagnosing that? I don't want to, this might need to be another topic for another day. As far as adrenal.
You do one, because this comes often for the women I work with. I think we should have a call of chat just on adrenal fatigue.
Absolutely. But what's a nice general answer we can provide this viewer so they can have a little guidance here? What would you say to this?
I think it depends, because this adrenal fatigue, like you said, it's a gray area, because adrenal fatigue is you produce too much cortisol or you're flat. You're to the point where you don't produce any. Nevertheless, the counter-regulatory hormones that are produced in the body when we eat low carb or when we fast involve adrenaline and cortisol. So it involves the adrenal gland.
Right.
So it has to be individualized. I would say if the person is doing low carb and their they have a flexible metabolism where the counter-regulatory hormones are not spiking in response to a low carb or a later meal, because the body has this wonderful dance, easily breaks fat for fuel and produces ketones. I guess fasting, could be okay. If the person just out of the blue eating like a high carb, even if it's whole foods, not the standard American diet, but it's 200 plus grams of carbs a day, even coming from whole grains and fruits, I think it would be a stress for the body. And if the adrenals are already, I don't know in which state, overworked or depleted by now, it could definitely adds to the stress of the body.
Right. I think that's a very individual, like you said, it's an individual problem. I think we follow the lab values that we have at the time. I think with a person with true adrenal fatigue, significant adrenal fatigue, we really want to be following them closely. They need to be, again, to our prior point, they really want to be with a physician, a nutritionist, another provider who can really keep close tabs and have a really nice relationship there to really experiment with that particular person, see how they do on how their body does on a fasting regimen. So, Well, this has been great. So we're at a little bit of an end here. So we want to talk about really our summary here. So fasting, intermittent fasting, what we enjoy is, or enjoy telling people, wait till you're kind of in the fat burning state, the ketogenic state or keto adaptive or fat adaptive before trying this. That tends to make a lot more sense. I think there could potentially be some more benefit when we wait till we are fully in the low carb lifestyle. I think that makes a ton of sense. And maybe to start, we start out with a 16-hour fast as opposed to a 24-hour fast, 36, 72. And then you kind of have fun with it. You see the effects you're getting from it. And like Dr. Fung says, and again, our book here, The Complete Guide to Fasting by Dr. Jason Fung, he's a big believer in life is about feasting, and then life is also about fasting. And too often, the majority of us have had way too many feasts in our life, and it's time to offset that a little bit with some fasting. And so we are going to have our feast of life, and it's important to also balance that. So I think fasting is really a nice way to provide that balance of life. So if we're going to feast, let's counter that with a fast. I think that's a good take home. Yes, absolutely. Well, good. Well, of course, if anyone has any questions, please use our comment section. I know Mihaela is just so great at and so timely at answering questions, and I try to do my part as well. So please forward any questions to us. We will answer those in virtual real time, and we look forward to next week's chat. If anyone has any topics of interest, please let us know, and we'd love to talk about it. Yes, thank you. All right, thank you. We'll see you next week. Yes, bye.